This is CGTN, China Global Television Network.
Ethiopia denies civilians were killed in airstrikes on Tigray's capital. The World Food Programme says it may cut crucial food aid to northeastern Nigeria due to a funding shortfall. And the United States is condemning the DPRK's latest missile test, calling it a destabilizing act. Hello and a very warm welcome to Africa Live on CGTN. I'm Lindy Mtongana in Nairobi. With me is Penina Karibe with a preview of your business news.
Thank you, Lindy. And coming up on Africa Live Business, the UK Prime Minister calls on leaders to invest in green programs at the Global Investment Summit. And the Sudan inflation rate drops for the second month in a row. I'll be back with details of those stories and plenty more, but for now, I'll hand you back to Lindy.
Thanks, Penina. Well, we start the hour off in Ethiopia's Tigray region, where the UN says 3 children were killed in a Monday airstrike. The United Nations gave the figures today, citing local health workers. Health workers said the casualties were caused in the strike on the outskirts of the regional capital, Mekelle. Jens Leiker, the spokesperson of the UN Office for the Coordination of Humanitarian Affairs, on Monday said a second strike wounded 9 people. The airstrike also damaged property, including houses and a hotel. The Tigray People's Liberation Front has blamed the Ethiopian government for launching the attacks on Mekelle. The government had initially denied the claims. State-run media later, however, reported that the Air Force did in fact conduct the attacks. Well, let's bring you an update on the situation now. We go live to Addis Ababa, where we're joined by our correspondent, Girum Chala. Girum, tell us how the Ethiopian government is reacting to these claims that even children were among those killed in the airstrikes on Mekelle.
Lindy, Ethiopian authorities have been responding to the claims and the allegations of children being killed because of the airstrikes held on Monday. We have heard, by the way, that this is an allegation, according to Ethiopian authorities, and there is no verification that anyone can provide. What we have attacked is strategic locations where TPLF has been using communication materials in establishments, for instance, for destabilizing the country and also challenging the sovereignty of the nation. So such claims have been made before by TPLF, and these are all false allegations. That's what we have heard from Ethiopian authorities. And by the way, the airstrikes have been also called successful by the Ethiopian National Defense Force for hitting the target that was intended at the moment. As you've said, TPLF is also claiming that 3 individuals, children, to be more specific, have been killed, and civilian establishments were targets by the Ethiopian National Defense Force, according to TPLF.
And this offensive, Girum, would certainly seem like an escalation in tensions and an escalation in fighting. What is the situation on the ground now in Tigray?
Well, at the moment, war has continued in different battlefields, mostly in the border cities and towns of the Amhara regional state in Tigray, and also the Afar regional state and the Tigray regional states. This war is going on between government force, more specifically the Ethiopian National Defense Force, militia from the Amhara regional state and other regional states, and also special force from the Amhara regional state against the TPLF force. And war has intensified over the last couple of days as the government's offensive, which is dubbed the final offensive against the TPLF force, has begun. And the airstrike that we've been mentioning earlier was a part of it. So generally what's happening at the moment is the escalation of the war, and it has also intensified over the last few days, and it is continued today. We've been hearing reports of people being evicted from different locations, and also both sides, including the Ethiopian government and the TPLF side, claiming victories out of this. But we can report that, yes, war has continued and it has escalated over the last few days.
Well, let's hope that civilian lives can be spared. Thank you so much, Girum Chala, live with us there from Addis Ababa. Now, Nigeria's President Muhammadu Buhari has condemned the latest killings by unknown gunmen in the northwestern Sokoto state as the death toll there rises to 43. Hundreds of people have been killed or kidnapped in attacks in Nigeria this year in states like Sokoto, Zamfara, Kaduna and Katsina. Our correspondent Phil Ihaza now reports from Abuja, the country's capital.
President Buhari's reaction comes a day after the news of armed criminals attacking a market in Goronyo, Sokoto State, killing dozens of traders there. He has threatened the attackers with ultimate destruction and says their days are numbered. Mr. Buhari says more advanced equipment is being acquired and deployed to assist the military in combing the forest and hideouts of the criminals in both ground and air search operations. The president also extended his sympathy to the families of the victims of the Goronyo attack and called for patience as the troops continue their advancement against the attackers. Local traders say more than 150 gunmen on motorcycles stormed the market, shooting indiscriminately at people. Many of the victims who survived the attack but are severely injured are currently receiving medical attention in various hospitals nearby. The governor of the state, Aminu Tambuwal, while hosting the Chief of Army Staff, Farouk Yahaya, requested that more troops and resources be deployed to the state to kill the attacks. In the meantime, telecommunications have been shut down in the affected areas, while the sale of cattle has been banned to prevent criminals from disguising themselves as cattle herders. Phil Ihaza, CGTN, Abuja.
The United Nations World Food Programme says that it may cut food rations for over 500,000 people in northeastern Nigeria in less than 2 weeks. This due to a funding shortfall. It is calling for urgent funds of at least $55 million to avert a possible food crisis in the region. Without the intervention, the World Food Body says the emergency food support will run out by the end of this month. Nigeria's north has been affected by years of conflict that's seen millions displaced by an insurgency by militant group Boko Haram.
What makes this situation of concern is that we were already providing prioritized assistance. There have already been austere measures that we had implemented, and the situation now will mean we have no other choice but to implement deeper cuts. We urgently require 197 million United States dollars over the next 6 months to be able to sustain our operations in Nigeria. This is probably the highest that we're witnessing since the crisis exploded in 2016. Approximately 4.4 million people are facing acute food insecurity in the conflict-affected states of Borno, Adamawa, and Yobe.
3 new Ebola cases have been confirmed in Eastern Democratic Republic of Congo, bringing the total to 5 in the last 10 days. Health officials in the DRC say the new cases recorded are linked to a previous outbreak that occurred in North Kivu province between 2018 and 2020. Experts found that the virus in the new cases barely differs from the strain seen 3 years ago. CGTN's Chris Ochomringa has more from Kinshasa.
The new Ebola cases were detected over the weekend in the Butsili health area. Health officials have confirmed 5 cases and 3 deaths so far since October 8th. Authorities say they have identified more than 370 people who came into contact with the Ebola patients and are monitoring them for symptoms. The new Ebola cases have been reported 5 months after the end of a previous outbreak in the same province. Experts from the DRC's National Institute for Biomedical Research say the new cases are linked to the Ebola outbreak that occurred between 2018 and 2020 in North Kivu province. That outbreak was the worst in the DRC's history. More than 2,200 people died of the infectious disease. The DRC Health Minister, Dr. Jean-Jacques Mbungani, has urged the people in North Kivu to remain calm, saying the country has developed the expertise to stop the spread of the new cases. The World Health Organization, UNICEF, and other aid agencies are supporting the DRC government to prevent the spread of the disease. The disease has broken out in a region that is facing insecurity, which has complicated the response. The DRC has recorded 12 Ebola outbreaks since the disease was first discovered in the equatorial forest in 1976. Chris Sochamringa, CGTN, Kinshasa, Democratic Republic of Congo.
Well, let's bring you more on this. We are now joined by Dr. Fiona Braka, the Program Manager for Emergency Response at the WHO Regional Office for Africa. She joins us live via Zoom from Brazzaville. Dr. Braka, tell us, why is this region of the DRC, or perhaps the DRC itself, seemingly so vulnerable to resurgent outbreaks of Ebola?
Indeed, the DRC has faced several outbreaks of Ebola. This particular outbreak comes just 5 months after the last outbreak was confirmed closed in May, and it's the 5th outbreak since 2018. It's important to understand how the virus is transmitted. The natural host is in animals, notably bats that are found in forests. And people get in contact with these animals through hunting or preparing their meat for consumption. And if they're not adequately protected, then they can get exposed to the virus. And once it's in humans, then it can be transmitted through exposure of the body fluids. Also, another mode of transmission, which is a small proportion of cases, is the virus does persist in survivors. Most will clear out the virus after 6 months following their illness, but in some individuals it can persist, which is why we have to keep track of all the survivors for at least 18 months, making sure they receive the right psychosocial and social support, ensuring that they understand the risks and they protect their loved ones. So it's a confluence of environmental factors, social behavior factors, and the slim chance in areas that have had outbreaks of the persistence of the virus in survivors.
And we have seen the DRC fight Ebola on different fronts. But tell us, Doctor, what progress has been made by the DRC in vaccinating against Ebola?
So we do have a vaccine that's been in place, pre-qualified by WHO since in late 2019, and it's an important aspect of the response. So it usually, we target the contacts of contacts and the frontline health workers and other workers who are involved in the response. So DRC has experience in use of the vaccine, and they do have a stockpile that is kept in Kinshasa. They've been able to transport some of that stockpile to Goma and down to Beni, where this outbreak is happening, and they are providing the vaccine to the high-risk groups over there. And as of today, we have over 130 high-risk contacts that have, and health workers that have received the vaccine. And as more contacts are identified and high-risk groups, the vaccine will be provided to protect them.
Well, thank you so much for that, Dr. Fiona Braka, joining us via Zoom from Brazzaville. Now, the United States is condemning the DPRK's latest missile test, calling it a destabilizing act. Pyongyang on Tuesday fired at least one ballistic missile from a submarine off its eastern coast. The DPRK has been advancing its military capabilities despite international sanctions over its nuclear program. Beijing called on all parties to show restraint as tensions rise in the region. Diplomatic efforts are ongoing to ease this tension. In Washington, nuclear envoys from South Korea, Japan, and the United States have held talks. Intelligence chiefs from the three countries are also meeting in Seoul, while the U.S. Special Representative for the DPRK, Sung Kim, said he would visit South Korea this week to discuss ways to restart dialogue with Pyongyang. Our correspondent, Jack Barton, has more from Seoul.
Still being treated as a suspected submarine-launched ballistic missile after a 70-minute meeting, an emergency meeting called by the President's office by the Joint Security Chiefs today. They said it flew about 450 kilometers at an altitude of 60 kilometers, but again, they couldn't give a precise definition on what type of weapon this was. The calculation seems to be because it came from that Sinchon area where the big submarine base is, this probably was a submarine-launched ballistic missile. If that is the case, it is very significant. It's been 2 years since the DPRK tested one. Since that model, we saw an updated model at a military parade in October last year, and then we saw an even further development, or a level 4 submarine launch missile at a parade back in January. So it could have been one of those that were tested, and of course they're much harder to detect. You can't tell when they're being pre-fueled or they're ready to fire, and it gives the capability of a second strike. So even if there's a preemptive strike on the DPRK, this is Pyongyang's way of saying, you know, we can still hit you back from our submarines later. So it's a very potent weapon. And amongst all the weapons they've tested this year, and there's many, there's a hypersonic missile, ballistic missile from a train, surface-to-air anti-aircraft missile and cruise missiles. This one would be considered to be the most significant.
Well, let's take a short break. Here's what's still ahead on Africa Live. The search continues for missing migrants off the Tunisian coast after a boat capsized on Sunday. And Ugandan authorities worried as persistent rainfall causes massive flooding in many parts of the country. Let's head to North Africa now, where 19 migrants are missing after their boat capsized off the coast of Tunisia. 4 bodies have been recovered so far. Officials say the boat was carrying 30 people, most of them young men. Adnan Chouachi has the details.
The Interior Ministry announced that the fishing boat left the coastal governorate of Al-Mahdiya for an illegal crossing. Regional authorities say overloading is behind this boat sinking. The search for survivors or other bodies is underway of Al-Shebba and the nearby regions. The Public Prosecutor's Office at the courts of Al-Mahdiya and Al-Munastir has ordered an investigation in order to determine the responsibilities. Meanwhile, 5 irregular migration attempts from the coast of Munastir to Italy were thwarted Sunday by the security forces. 7 individuals from Tunisia and other African countries were arrested. In addition, 7 engines and 3 boats and a quantity of fuel were seized during this operation. According to the Tunisian Forum for Economic and Social Rights, the number of migrants departing from Tunisia who have reached the Italian coast since the start of 2021 stands at 10,911, up 27% compared to 2020. 16,209 migrants have been prevented from reaching the Italian coast since the start of 2021. This number is up 47% compared to the same period last year. In addition, the European Border and Coast Guard Agency Frontex says there were 5,670 illegal border crossings in September, 33% more compared to the same period in 2020. Most migrants came from Tunisia, Bangladesh and Egypt. Experts say the number of irregular migration attempts will increase this year due to the economic and social crisis, as well as the negative repercussions of the COVID-19 crisis. Adnan Chouachi, CGTN, Tunis.
To Uganda now, where more than 1 million people have been affected by heavy rains and floods since April last year. That's according to Uganda's Ministry for Relief, Disaster Preparedness and Refugees. There are fears persistent rains in the country could worsen the situation. Leon Senyange has more.
Officials say the past 2 months have been the worst, with flooding causing massive damage in the east, west and south of Uganda. The situation has been worse in Kasese district in the southwestern part of the country, where River Nyamwamba burst its banks 3 times this year. Numerous mudslides have also been registered in the mountainous areas of the Elgon in the east. Communities around the country's major lakes have suffered more losses due to flooding. The loss of property and crops has led to major food security and sanitation risks. According to Uganda's Meteorological Authority, the rains are expected to continue for the month of October. Government says it is developing long-term solutions to managing disasters with emphasis on emergency coordination within the affected areas. Leon Senyange, CGTN, Kampala, Uganda.
Young people from China and African nations are gathered in Beijing for a 5-day China-Africa Youth Festival. The event is sponsored by the Chinese Ministry of Foreign Affairs and the China Sung Ching Ling Foundation. Wang Hui has the story.
The 6th China-Africa Youth Festival has been held annually since 2016. 45 African students representing 44 countries and some 60 young Chinese people were at the opening ceremony. The theme of this year's event celebrates the Communist Party of China's centenary, the wisdom and the responsibility of youth, and a new chapter in common development between China and Africa.
Every young Chinese and African person is a builder and promoter of a shared future for the China-Africa community. I hope you can remember the glorious history of China-Africa ties and continue to safeguard the unity of China and Africa, and deepen the mutual understanding and friendship between Chinese and African people.
Olivier Mingdu from Cameroon is taking up doctoral studies at Peking University. He says Africa's huge younger population can be a catalyst for relations.
If you look at the African population, 60% is under 25 years old, so it's pretty young. So this, for us to have this kind of meaningful platform, it actually means a lot, so that we can merge our minds together and actually help our government make a smooth cooperation or communication between China and African countries.
Events like these have become valuable venues for education, considering the travel restrictions of COVID-19.
Because of the pandemic, it's very hard for us to visit African countries. I think this is a valuable opportunity for us to meet my peers from Africa, to learn about their cultures and share our opinions about certain issues.
When people and people together, we learn culture, we learn understanding, we learn what you like or what I don't like. And I take what I missed, I will learn from you. It's a platform of learning, it's a platform of unity, and it's a platform of love.
In the next 3 days, the young people will be treated to Chinese cultural shows and get to visit some landmarks in the capital, such as the Winter Olympics Stadium and the Museum of the Communist Party of China. Wang Hui, CGTN, Beijing.
Somalia has received humanitarian support from the Chinese government in the form of tents, mosquito nets, first aid kits and healthcare equipment. The handover ceremony took place in the capital, Mogadishu. In attendance were the ambassador of China to Somalia and Somalia's Minister of Humanitarian Affairs and Disaster Management. The supplies are considered timely following statistics from the United Nations that show that 5.9 million Somalis require humanitarian assistance. These stats also revealed that 3 million Somalis have been displaced by natural disasters and conflicts.
We never forget the sufferings of our brothers and sisters in Somalia. We take your difficulties as our own, as we know full well how lives could be changed in the wake of natural disasters. We face similar sufferings and challenges, and we share the same sympathies and compassion. The humanitarian supplies from China this time include 10,000 tents, 50,000 mosquito nets, 20,000 aid kits, and thousands of baby weight scales, stethoscopes, and thermometers. It shows a people-oriented approach for a new stage of balanced, coordinated, and inclusive growth, as stated in Chinese President Xi Jinping's proposal of the Global Development Initiative.
The federal government of Somalia, which I represent on the humanitarian affairs, would like to thank you for your continued support to the government and the people of Somalia during this difficult period when they have some serious humanitarian needs which are on the rise. We are committed to help our people. We thank you for the assistance. It will help us deliver for our nations.
3 African women received the International Women of Courage Award this year. Among them was Zara Mohammed Ahmad, who was once a refugee in Tanzania during Somalia's civil war. She has since returned home and is continuing her fight for human rights, especially for young women in Somalia. CGTN's Daniela Pearson brings us her story.
Meet 70-year-old Zara Mohammed, a former refugee and now human rights advocate in Somalia. Zara fled to Tanzania after the onset of Somalia's civil war in 1991. Upon her return to Mogadishu 8 years later, she started a women-led union to advocate for peace and engage in dialogue with militias and warlords.
When a country collapses, the youth and women suffer most. We started a process to disarm the school-aged boys. We were 61 members. We named our union HINA, which literally meant Women for Peace. We started to sit down with leaders of the clan militia. We had to talk to them about our interest to disarm these boys and take them to school. We taught them the language and hired teachers for them. We bought chairs and opened a temporary school in every checkpoint. The schools were from the airport road to as far as the 30th Street.
In addition to opening schools, the women-led initiative also raised funds to build hospitals.
We were able to successfully open Banadir Hospital. Women suffered from fistula. Babies were born by traditional midwives. They carried out operations while it was still dark, and razor blades were their only tools. We mobilized some trained midwives, approached doctors, and engaged with the militia who controlled Banadir Hospital during that time.
Of special focus to Zara was the challenges faced by women in communities filled with violence. To further push the empowerment agenda, she founded the Somali Women Development Center. Her goal, to minimize suffering among Somali women.
We started SWDC in 2010 before the start of the famous 2011 drought. It was founded by Somali Women Union. The entire board members were Somali women. We wanted to assist women from 3 different aspects: building the economic capacity, assisting in the re-establishment of social issues like hospitals and schools for their children, and advocating for their political representation.
Zara's efforts did not go unnoticed. In March, she was one of 3 African women chosen to receive the annual International Women of Courage Award. The prize recognizes women around the world who have demonstrated exceptional leadership in advocating for peace, equality, and justice. Daniela Pearson, CGTN.
And time now for your business news with Penina Karibe.
Thank you, Lindy. Coming up on Africa Live Business. The UK Prime Minister calls on leaders to invest in green programs at the Global Investment Summit. And the Sudan inflation rate drops for the 2nd month in a row.
How will your world change today? What happens here? What happens there? Or what you make happen for yourself? If it matters to you, it matters to us too. Your stories are the stories that need to be told. Africa Live, Find your voice.
Africa is the nexus of enterprise, and global business will tell you why it matters.
From the mega investment projects to multi-billion-dollar mergers and acquisitions.
Africa today collects, just in terms of revenues from taxes alone, $545 billion a year. If you take 10% of that and you devote it to the energy sector, problem solved.
All this on Global Business, weekdays at this time on CGTN.
Britain announced ambitious details of its plans to go net carbon neutral by 2050 as it gears up to host a critical UN climate summit at the end of October. CGTN's Guy Henderson reports.
Laying the groundwork for a green industrial revolution. Every home in the English village of Swaffham Prior is being retrofitted with heat pumps to replace fossil fuel-driven boilers. It is the first community in the country to do so.
So a ground source heat pump is essentially, it's extracting thermal energy from the ground at a relatively low temperature and then using a heat pump to drive up the temperature, sort of like a reverse fridge, if you will.
Britain's ageing housing stock accounts for about a fifth of all its emissions. So its government has now announced plans to encourage a rapid national rollout of such systems with the help of more than $600 million in grants. That's just part of a long-awaited strategy to go net carbon neutral by 2050. It'll be kick-started, says UK Prime Minister Boris Johnson, by billions of dollars in state funding.
What we want to support is direct air capture, long-term battery life, jet zero, and green hydrogen. I think these are all technologies that have massive potential, but they're currently underinvested in by comparison with some others.
And the hope is the private sector will then follow. Ministers say nearly $16.5 billion of investment has already been promised. Still, there's criticism at both ends of the spectrum. Environmental groups say further action's needed. The oil and gas industry worries the housing plan specifically may not be realistic.
We can't just switch off oil and gas and move straight to the new energies. We have to find a way to have a managed transition so that as production and use of oil and gas decline, we have the new energies taking up the slack. And the problem, what we've seen at the minute, we're not yet equipped to be able to take up the slack quick enough.
Britain hosts a critical UN climate summit at the end of this month. Its Prime Minister has laid down what he sees as a marker he wants others to follow. Guy Henderson, CGTN.
Elsewhere, United Nations Special Rapporteur Elena Duhan has begun a 10-day visit to Zimbabwe to assess the impact of sanctions imposed on the country by the US and European Union. The Southern African nation blames the embargoes for crippling the economy and retarding development.
The United Nations envoy is in the country at the invitation of Zimbabwe's government. Elena Duhan met Zimbabwean President Emmerson Mnangagwa as well as the Ministers of Justice, Foreign Affairs and Finance on Monday. She is scheduled to meet other government ministers, the business community, opposition political parties and civic society groups. Zimbabwe has been under the United States and European Union imposed sanctions that target businesses and individuals linked to the ruling ZANU-PF party since 2002. It claims the measures have cost the nation billions in lost revenue, potential investment and frozen international payments. Zimbabwe has escalated its lobby to the UN because it believes the sanctions are unilateral coercive measures that go against international law as highlighted by a resolution passed by the UN Human Rights Council in 2017. Farai Mwakutuya, CGTN, Harare, Zimbabwe.
Inflation in Sudan has dropped for the second month in a row. Sudan's Central Bureau of Statistics says the annual rate of inflation fell to 365.8% in September from 387.56% in August. It says this is due to lower rates of growth in food and imported consumer good prices. Naba Muhyiddin has the details from Khartoum.
Sudan's inflation rate is falling.
according to the latest data. In June, the government lifted fuel subsidies, and it's targeting an inflation rate of about 95% in the general budget of 2021. Some local traders say measures to reduce inflation are not having a big enough effect.
Yes, there's a big drop in the inflation rate. The percentage is big, but prices are still high. People are still suffering high prices.
The drop is just government reports we heard about. We never felt any differences. Instead of having lower prices of goods, the prices jumped in the past few days. The government is not handling it.
Earlier this month, the World Bank chief visited Sudan for the first time in decades. The World Bank says it will commit about $2 billion for Sudan in grants next year. However, economic analysts say the inflation rate is still far too high and needs strategic solutions.
The state can tackle the high inflation rate if it encourages the production operations and productivity through raising production rates and the exports, besides lowering the imports that will reduce the deficiency in the trade balance, and that will create abundance in products and reduce prices.
Sudan's economy has been hit by the instability that led to the ouster of the former president Omar al-Bashir 2 years ago. The current government has implemented wide reforms to attempt to tackle a budget deficit, widespread shortages, and soaring prices for essential goods. The currency was sharply devalued in February in a bid to correct economic and monetary imbalances. The government is predicting nearly 1% rise in GDP for Sudan this year. However, many Sudanese people complain of declining living conditions amid high inflation, and political turmoil could further dent confidence in the country's economy. Naba Muhiddin, CGTN, Khartoum, Sudan.
The Kenyan government says people will be able to use Nairobi's expressway by June next year. The China Roads and Bridge Construction Company began roadworks in 2020. CGTN's Enoch Sekolia reports.
On one afternoon in Nairobi, I was granted exclusive access to the elevated part of the expressway that is under construction. On top of the elevated part of the road that will cost $550 million to build, one can see how it's changing the city's skyline even before it's completed. The expressway will be a 27-kilometer highway, some of it elevated, and will connect the East Africa's country's major airport and the city's commercial center.
We'll deliver the bridge and those grade levels by December of this year. So in another short 3 months, we can see a highway, and I think we are already experiencing it. Then, of course, we have these toll stations to set up. They are very sophisticated electronics. So we'll give ourselves 6 months.
It will be the longest bridge in East and Central Africa by the time construction work is done. Its construction by the China Roads and Bridge Construction CRBC has been exciting to watch for city dwellers. It already looks like a giant cut-in through Nairobi's tallest buildings. Sylvia Gadhoni, who is working on the project as a translator, says she has learned a lot since the construction began.
It has been a new experience for me since this is the first time I'm working on a bridge construction project. I've worked elsewhere in a road construction project, but this has been so new to me, and it's exciting, factoring everything from technology to the technical bit of it.
The expressway is already reshaping Nairobi's landscape, and it is expected that once completed, this road will change things in a city characterized by heavy traffic during peak hours.
Travel time anywhere in Nairobi that is impacted by the expressway will come down from the 2.5 hours you spend, or 3 hours or 4 hours going to Mololongo, to, you cannot believe it, 30 and 20 minutes.
The road's construction is being financed by the China Road and Bridge Corporation, the Chinese firm that will operate the highway under a public-private partnership for a period of time. It simply means for one to use the 4- and 6-lane dual carriage, he or she will pay a toll of between $2 and $3 US.
We are trying to look for a solution that can give you express movement, across the city, where you're not slow down if you have no local business in the city of Nairobi.
The highway project is the latest Kenyan infrastructure to be funded and or either constructed by China. Enoch Sikolia, CGTN, Nairobi, Kenya.
Trade between China and Europe has blossomed after the introduction of transcontinental freight services. Since its inception in 2011, the China-Europe freight trains from Chongqing have become a vital link for the country's ambitious Belt and Road initiative. Our reporter Liu Jiaojin has the story.
Chongqing, an important node city, has got another major developmental kickstart. The city is an integral link in the revival of the Asian Silk Road, or part of what's known as the Belt and Road Initiative.
New international railway lines are helping to connect modern-day China with Europe. The first line starting from southwest China's Chongqing was put into use over 10 years ago. Trains are loaded with containers filled with laptops and other high-end products in the train hub in Chongqing. They will cover a distance over 11,000 kilometers before reaching their final destination in Duisburg, Germany.
From a single laptop computer to mechanical equipment, auto parts, daily necessities, and 31 other products, the China-Europe freight trains are seeing constant upgrades. Over the past decade, nearly 7,000 trains on Chongqing have made trips to 110 countries and regions.
The new Western Land Sea Corridor is not just a logistics one, but an economic corridor.
The city's free trade zone is being established here, and the facility will provide Chinese and foreign entrepreneurs alike with new business opportunities.
In September 2017, the first Rail Sea combined transport train of the Land Sea New Channel started operations in Chongqing. With the continuous improvement of infrastructure and services, the logistics capabilities of the new Land Sea Corridor in Western China has been significantly enhanced. Liu Zhaoqin, CGTN, Chongqing.
After vaccinating 84% of its residents, Singapore is gradually expanding quarantine-free travel. The city-state recently added more countries to its vaccinated travel lane scheme after successful trials with Germany and Brunei. The policy comes as a welcomed relief to Singapore's travel-starved residents. CGTN's Mary Lu reports.
We will introduce vaccinated travel lanes.
Like most Singaporeans, these words were music to Desiree's ears, who has been eager to plan her next trip abroad.
My first reaction was to go check out ticket prices. It's been so long since I've traveled, so when we heard that the VTL was coming out, oh, the excitement.
In pre-COVID times, the 26-year-old drama teacher would travel 6 to 7 times a year. But due to pandemic-related border closures, she hasn't left the city-state since her last trip in September 2019.
It does take quite a bit emotionally and mentally to be here for the past 2 years. I really do want to just get out of Singapore, to breathe a different air, be able to see new places and new things, because after a while, sometimes I feel like Singapore does get a bit suffocating. It's about 700 to London.
Finally being able to travel quarantine-free, Desiree is planning a Christmas break in Europe with her friends. Her primary concern, she says, is the soaring ticket prices for quarantine-free flights.
Desiree is not the only one who has itchy feet. Singaporeans are so travel deprived. Within hours of the VTL announcement, they rush to make bookings for their year-end holidays. Singapore Airlines website crashed due to the high demand. Travel agencies such as Chan Brothers also received an overwhelming number of queries.
Chan Brothers saw inquiries increase 5 times on their website alone. Customers also reached out through messaging apps, emails, and social media.
I think the announcement is also very timely and opportune because the year-end period is usually the period where Singaporeans are looking forward to an overseas holidays.
Travel agents say due to the complexity in the post-pandemic tourism landscape, they see opportunities to broaden their market to independent travelers who used to shun away from their services.
There are going to be accommodated travel routes which vary across destinations. And I think this is where a travel agent could come in, because then that's where we would have the most updated information and we will be able to solve all the pain points that travelers have in current times.
With not much domestic tourism to speak of, the travel industry in Singapore had come to a standstill in the past 18 months. As borders begin to reopen, the industry, as well as the travelers, are dying to hit the road once again. Miralu, CGTN, Singapore.
Well, that's all on Africa Live Business. But still to come on global business, Egypt's inflation rate surges 6.6% due to rising costs of food, education and healthcare. I'll have the details at 1800 GMT, and I will see you then. For now, I'll hand you back to Lindy.
Thanks, Penina. Well, let's take a short break. Your sports news up next. Coming up, Crane's head coach found Milutin Micho-Sredovic guilty of sexual assault.
China's coastal industrial centers see new potential, with manufacturing flourishing by the sea. From protecting the ocean environment to boosting the marine economy, new innovations seek sustainable development. Along the coast of the Yellow Sea and the Bohai Sea, CGTN presents Tides of Change Part 3, our ultimate trip to discover a promising future.
How would you create your legend? On the fields, on the tracks, in the arenas of Africa. Were you born to be a player? Could this moment be yours? Sports Scene. Find your game.
Africa Live. Find your voice.
In your sports news, Uganda's head coach, Milutin Micho-Sredovic, has been found guilty of sexual assault by a South African court. Sredovic was accused of making unsolicited advances towards a woman while at a football tournament. At the moment, however, the verdict is not thought to affect his position as the Cranes head coach. CGTN's Leon Senyange has more.
The incident for which Micho was found guilty happened during the COSAFA Under-20 Championships in South Africa last December. At the time, Micho was the head coach of the Zambia national team. The Port Elizabeth Regional Court in South Africa found the 52-year-old guilty of 2 counts of sexual assault. He was, however, handed a 5-year suspended sentence, but also granted leave to appeal the decision. The Football Federation in Uganda, where Micho is currently the national team head coach, has also issued a statement describing the situation as a private matter. Micho was granted permission to attend the court session in South Africa and is expected to return to Uganda to resume preparations for next month's 2022 World Cup qualifiers. Leon Senyange, CGTN, Kampala, Uganda.
And to Egypt now, where football coach Farida Salem is on a mission to inspire young girls to become better players. Farida has set up the Empower